the way that we've approached mental health and words like clinical depression, schizophrenia, psychosis,
bipolar,
these words, the way that we've come to understand them in our society has created massive problems. So we see the results of looking at things in this very pathological way. We see that people are, for example, dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should from preventable lifestyle issues because of the strong association being chronic, unmanaged, and I stress the word unmanaged stress, toxic stress and physical illness, and that playing back into our mental health. So what are those things? The way I understand from my work and the colleagues that I work with in the scientific approach and spiritual approach that I come at it from, and I believe that the science is very supportive in this kind of approach that I'm going to talk about now. It's also very instinctive. Things like schizophrenia are descriptive words. They're not diseases. They're descriptive words for a person who's experienced something that is really terrible and it's broken. It's such a distorted experience that it disturbed and broken the mind.
It's like fragmented
the mind. And because the mind works through the brain and the body and the mind, and experience, and we can maybe dive into that as well as you're going on, but the mind is what we're experiencing life with. Without mind, you're dead. The mind takes the experience and puts it into the mind, brain, and body. And if it's distorted, it creates this fragmented brokenness, which then becomes fragmented brokenness inside the physical brain, which activates the immune system and all the systems of the body, because that brokenness is also reflected inside of the body. And then the person shows up broken. And the more unmanaged, the more maybe the source issue, the abuse or whatever is continued, the worse those symptoms will be. So symptoms, signals, let's get away from the word symptoms, which is very medical. So I don't see schizophrenia as a lifelong disease. I don't see it as that at all. I see that as a part of a description of what a human has gone through, how they're showing up. It's so when a person shows up, they show up with emotions, with how their body's functioning, behaviors, and their perspective. And someone who's showing up with so-called schizophrenia, we could put the schizophrenia as a collective word for things like hallucinations and delusions and living in extreme states. We can categorize that into all those 4 categories. Their perspective is shifted, their body's not functioning like it should, because they generally will find physical issues. Their behaviors are not what we expect, that the so-called normal society expects, and their emotions are all over the place. And that combination, you can break each of that down to a more detail, but it's created a very disruptive pattern. But that is the body psychoneurobiological network trying to process this experience and trying to help the person to actually, we help ourselves to actually pay attention to the signals. So instead of trying to say schizophrenia is a disease that you need to control with medication and it's lifelong and it's genetic, which none of that is actually scientific at all. It's been disproved or never was really proven. So, and I'm not saying schizophrenia doesn't exist. I'm saying it exists as a description of a set of behaviors with emotions and perspectives, and it's very real and it's very big and it's very disruptive. But I'm not invalidating and sticking it into a label in the box. I'm saying that that's a human who has gone through extreme experiences. Very often we'll see patterns in family because there's the nurturing aspect of what we go through and experience, which is activating these networks and things pass through the DNA, epigenetics and that kind of thing. But it's not that if your parent has it, you're going to have it. It's disease that's passed through, like various diseases can pass through. We should shift away from calling schizophrenia a disease and see it as a set of symptoms of someone who's broken. So therefore, schizophrenia, bipolar, another one. It's a description of how you're showing up. ADHD, a description of how you're showing up. And if you start pulling it apart, we can say, okay, that's not who you are. You're showing up like that because of. So we need to look at a person validation. We need to give acknowledgement of the hugeness of what that person is and has and maybe still going through, versus just, those symptoms, schizophrenia, label, diagnosis, medicate, and that's it for the rest of your life.
I could potentially see one plane where having a defined explanation for some type of condition could provide some type of relief for a person as well, and potentially temporarily reduce the anxiety and the stress of confusion. And so even though it's not the absolute answer, it's unanswer. And I could potentially see there being value in providing definition for a person for some type of compass, just to begin, because they were so fragmented and so disorganized and disoriented, just to provide something to, okay, I'm going to start moving in a direction. So to not completely disregard like the entirety of that approach of medicine, I feel like that like there is value there, and I think the invitation would be to go even deeper. Is that?
And so yes, I agree with you to a certain extent, and I'm not saying take it away. I'm actually giving it more validation and more honor. So if you just say to someone, "Oh, you have schizophrenia. This is why." There's temporary relief.
Yeah, you're whacking symptoms. Let's suppress a symptom. Suppress a symptom.
It's like we often explain it's like an empty gift. So you get a gift, you think, "Phew, that explains things," and then you open. Now what? And so that's the shallowness and it doesn't honor the hugeness of what that person is going through. So I'm not saying throw the word out. I'm just saying look at it rather as a description. Instead of saying I have schizophrenia or a family member has, that's who they are. Take that identity away and say that this family member or myself, whatever, have had this diagnosis, but it's actually not a diagnosis. It's a description of how I am at the moment. And it's just words. It's a description. So instead of a label, it's a description. And it's a description that encourages curiosity and let's find out why, because it's not who you are, it's how you are showing up in the current moment. So those voices that you're hearing serving a purpose to cope as a coping mechanism. So it's to understand or the psychotic breaks or the extreme depression. We have to honor that and understand that that's not who you are, but it's telling us something. So I'm not saying throw the words out. I'm saying give them more attention.